Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. 9 enormous vortexes swirled in the sky of the fallen sword world, slowly eating away at any hope which remained in the hearts of the disciples down below. In any Foundation establishment Holy Land, Earth string energy was limited, and could only be used by so many cultivators to reach Foundation establishment. Furthermore, the number of cultivators who could succeed was not fixed. If someone reached 8 tide flows, they would absorb even more Earth string energy than usual, significantly reducing the overall amount in the world, and would force some people to end their own tide flows prematurely. Of course, someone reaching 8 tide flows wasn't the most terrifying scenario. The worst was if some prodigy came along among the chosen who managed to reach 9 tide flows. Once someone reached the peak of Earthstring Foundation establishment, they would most certainly slaughter the people from the other sects who had tried to interfere, and prevent them from succeeding. In fact, even people from that person's own sect who had interfered might also be killed. Such a thing had only ever occurred once, 800 years before with Master Limitless. A scene of madness had played out at that time, in which the Pill Stream sect was completely wiped out, and only a few people from the Profound Stream sect and the Spirit Stream sect escaped with their lives. Even many people from the Bloodstream sect were slaughtered by the enraged Master Limitless. For the disciples from the 4 sects who hadn't formed their Earth String capture crystals yet, they either had to resign themselves to their fates, or go on a killing rampage, resorting to any tactics possible to succeed. Sometimes that would even mean ambushing fellow disciples. It was all for the chance to get the Earth String capture crystal and then reach Earth String Foundation establishment. Time passed. The second wave, which consisted of Shangguan Tianyu, Xu Zhaoshan, Beihan Lai and Zhao Ru, had all completed their first 3 tide flows. As for Ghost Fong, he had already completed his 4th, and was moving on to his 5th. Song Ke and 9 Isles were already halfway through their 5th. Bai Xiaochun was the fastest of them all. He was almost finished with his 5th tide flow. Earthstring energy was rushing into the vortex, and a 5th spiritual sea was forming inside of him. 4 hours later, a tremor ran through him as the 5th whirlpool inside of him expanded. Tideflow power erupted, and his 5th spirit sea was completed in his Dantian region. His 5th tideflow was over. Now for the 6th, he said, his eyes glimmering with intense focus. Having reached this point in the process, he had no desire to give up. He wanted to know what his limit was. He wanted to know how far he could go. He wanted to know how many tide flows he was capable of. The Violet Chi Cauldron control art was the basis of my first tide flow. Violet Chi Cauldron summoning was the second. As for my 3rd and 4th, that came from the power of the dragon and mammoth. The 5th tide flow should have been from the magic of sea forming. However, because I broke through the first shackle of mortality, that turned into my 5th tide flow. Therefore, it's now time to continue on with sea-forming magic and start my 6th tide flow. Taking a deep breath, he again called upon the explosive power of the dragon mammoth sea-forming scripture. Having already used the power of the dragon and the mammoth, it was now time to use the power of sea-forming. The so-called sea-forming was actually a method of creating a spiritual sea, of forming a Tao foundation. Almost immediately, a 6th vortex formed up in the sky, within which was a majestic, roiling sea. Although the vortex was a spectacular sight, it was somewhat unstable, and didn't absorb energy very quickly. Bai Xiaochun had the Water Swamp Kingdom, but didn't want to use that yet. Since he could use the power of sea forming, he didn't want to waste his powerful secret magic. When the other cultivators saw what was happening, they began to sigh with relief. Bai Xiaochun's 6th tide flow is unstable. From the look of it, he's already reached his limit, and won't be able to last much longer. That crumbling mountain in the 5th tide flow must have been his only secret magic. 6 tide flows is already pretty amazing. More than that would be spectacular. It was at this point that Fang Lin and 9 Isles also breathed sighs of relief. They were completely on guard, and keeping close track of everyone else's progress. Bai Xiaochun's already reached the end, so there's no need to worry about him anymore. That was what both of them were thinking. Ghost Fong frowned. Considering that he knew Bai Xiaochun hadn't used his secret magic yet, he could tell that something strange was going on. As for Song Ke, he looked on, eyes glittering thoughtfully. Time passed. Bai Xiaochun's 6th tide flow slowly sucked in earth string energy, and although the vortex wasn't stable, it didn't collapse. Gradually, there were a few other disciples who managed to form their earth string capture crystals and begin their tide flows. One of them was Hu Yunfei. It was after the 60-hour mark passed that Bai Xiaochun's sixth tide flow finished. Most people present assumed that he was finished. In the little immortals cave he'd carved out beneath the lake, his eyes glittered as his sixth spiritual sea formed inside of him. Then, he took a deep breath and suddenly stretched both arms out in front of him. Secret magic. Water Swamp Kingdom. Water vapor filled the immortals cave, growing more and more dense until it began to seep out into the lake water itself. The lake began to seethe, and in the blink of an eye, expanded rapidly. Within a few breaths of time, it grew so rapidly that it became less like a lake and more like a sea. Up above in the sky, Bai Xiaochun's sixth vortex had stopped moving. However, instead of vanishing, it seemed to be building up energy. Then, a faint pressure began to weigh down in the fallen sword world, to the surprise and shock of everyone. Even Nine Isles and the other top chosen were all astonished. Bai Xiaochun raised his hands up above him, then shoved them back down. Instantly, huge waves roiled out across the surface of the lake up above, along with intense rumbling sounds. The sixth vortex began to ripple and distort, then spin like mad. Gasps rang out in the fallen sword world as a seventh vortex appeared. However, that wasn't the end of it. In the same instant that the seventh vortex appeared, the air above it began to twist and turn. Countless clouds seethed as an eighth vortex appeared. The seventh and eighth vortexes appeared at the same time, accompanied by thunderous rumbling that struck shock into the hearts of all the cultivators present. Impossible. He clearly used a secret magic for his fifth tide flow. Secret magic. That's a secret magic. Heavens. What he used before wasn't actually a secret magic. I can't believe two vortexes appeared at the same time. Is that the Spirit Stream Sect's spectacular secret magic, the Water Swamp Kingdom? Or is it ghosts haunt the night? Soon, the cries of shock turned into bellows of rage. 8 tide flows. He's reached 8 tide flows. If he succeeds, a vast amount of earth string energy will be sucked away. Stop him. The entire sky shook as the 7th and 8th vortexes began to spin rapidly. The power of the tide flow that erupted out to absorb earth string energy was vastly stronger than anything before, greater by dozens of times over. It was like the power of an enormous black hole, reaching out into the entire world and tugging at all the earth string energy in it. The vortexes belonging to the other disciples began to twist and distort, and even slow down their own absorption. It was at this point that Fang Lin opened his eyes, then spoke in a voice that rose up into the vortex above him and spread out to fill the entire area. Pillstream Sect disciples, heed my command, kill Bai Xiaochun. Stop him from completing his 8th tide flow. All who comply will receive special compensation from me upon returning to the sect. I'll acquire foundation establishment pills for all of you, and take care of you for your whole life. At the same time, Nine Isles sat in his spell formation, his eyes flickering with killing intent. Profound Stream Sect disciples, heed my command, exterminate Bai Xiaochun. Kill him, and his earth string energy will disperse back into the world. That will benefit me, you, and everyone. Even as Nine Isles' words echoed out, Song Ke opened his eyes. After a moment of thought, he said, Bloodstream Sect, heed my command, kill Bai Xiaochun and put an end to his tide flow. Hu Yunfei was starting to get nervous, but being in the middle of his own foundation establishment, could do nothing to help. Shangguan Tianyu's eyes flickered, and a cold smile appeared on his face. He had been shaken by the fact that Bai Xiaochun started his 7th and 8th tide flows simultaneously, but now he wasn't so nervous. You're simply courting death, he murmured. You can't blame us for that. With that, he closed his eyes and proceeded with his own tide flow. Ghost Fang's eyes glittered. Although he felt no ill will toward Bai Xiaochun, at the moment, he couldn't help him even if he wanted to. Beihan Lai hesitated for a moment. By this point, he wasn't sure how he felt about Bai Xiaochun. He hated him, and even wanted to kill him. But as more time passed, he had reached a point where he didn't want Bai Xiaochun to die at the hands of anyone except himself. Despicable wretches, he shouted. However, he was powerless to offer any assistance at the moment. As the number 1 chosen from the various sects issued their orders, the other disciples in the fallen sword world looked on with bloodshot eyes. Kill Bai Xiaochun. If he dies, then his earth string energy will disperse, and we'll have a chance to succeed. That's right. Song Ke, Nine Isles and even Fang Lin are people we can't risk provoking. But according to the sect's information, Bai Xiaochun isn't the strongest here. We can definitely take him down. I think each sect has different information about Bai Xiaochun. But now's not the time to worry about that. Kill him, and we'll all have a chance to reach Foundation establishment. He doesn't qualify to reach 8 tide flows. Eyes crimson, disciples sped from all directions toward Bai Xiaochun's lake. The Spirit Stream sect disciples were starting to get nervous, but considering that all of the disciples from the other 3 sects were joining forces, they were completely outnumbered. They were able to stop some of them, but not all. Soon, disciples from all 3 sects were closing in on Bai Xiaochun. It was at that point that Bai Xiaochun's eyes snapped open. Wanna kill me? Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with piercing light, and yet, inside, his heart was pounding. He had known all along that his attempt at Foundation establishment couldn't be made without interference. Unless he immediately ended his 7th and 8th tide flows, people would definitely try to kill him. Song Ke, Nine Isles, Fang Lin, you're all despicable. I'm not taking away your earth string energy, yet you send your fellow disciples to try to stop me? Just wait until I'm in Foundation establishment, then you'll know how awesome I am. Gritting his teeth, he temporarily suppressed the hatred in his heart. He knew that he was in a moment of deep crisis, and that the slightest carelessness could result in utter catastrophe. The people coming at him weren't just trying to prevent him from proceeding with his Foundation establishment, they were trying to kill him and steal the earth string energy that existed in his spiritual seas. Because of the life or death danger, a vicious, maddened look appeared on his face. All of a sudden, he felt like he was back in mountains being chased by the Luokan clan. Rumbling sounds echoed out above the lake as dozens of disciples from the 3 sects closed in. However, even as they neared his immortals cave, Bai Xiaochun activated 200 of the more than 1,000 paper talismans he'd set up at the entrance of the cave. As they ignited, an enormous shield dozens of meters thick appeared, causing the lake water to churn violently. As for the incoming disciples, they were completely blocked by the glittering shield. Each one of those defensive paper talismans is extremely expensive. Bai Xiaochun is down to his last line of defense. Destroy these shields, and we'll be able to get into his immortals cave. Kill Bai Xiaochun, and the earth string energy inside of him will return to the world around us. We'll finally get a chance at Foundation establishment. The dozens of disciples that had arrived viciously unleashed numerous powerful attacks onto the shields. One by one, the shields began to distort and then shatter. Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath. The 7th and 8th vortexes spun rapidly, filling heaven and earth with rumbling sounds, causing massive amounts of earth string energy to rush toward him. When about half of the 200 paper talisman shields had been destroyed, Fang Lin of the Pill Stream sect completed his tide flow, despite the pressure which had been weighing down on his vortex. Without hesitating, he began his 7th tide flow. Next was 9 Isles. After that, Song Ke. Soon, all of them were in the middle of their 7th tide flow. Ghostfang had begun 20 hours later than Bai Xiaochun, and was now about half finished with his 6th tide flow. Even still, it took all of them added together to match the speed with which Bai Xiaochun was absorbing earth string energy. The earth string energy in the fallen sword world was rapidly diminishing, causing the disciples of the 3 sects to grow even more anxious. More and more of them chose to try to kill Bai Xiaochun. After all, the overall earth string energy that remained was now almost half gone, and the only way to reverse the situation was to kill Bai Xiaochun. More and more disciples showed up to attack him. By this point, the lake was destroyed, and Bai Xiaochun's defensive shields were almost gone. The nearly 100 disciples who had gathered in the area were starting to get very excited. Come on, one big blast should destroy those shields. Hurry up, Bai Xiaochun's shields are almost gone. However, even as hope flickered in their eyes, Bai Xiaochun ignited another 400 paper talismans. Instantly, the shields were hundreds of meters thick, a dazzling display that provoked cries of shock among the attacking disciples. Damn it, he had more. How many paper talismans does Bai Xiaochun have? I refuse to believe this. This has definitely got to be his final line of defense. Booms echoed out as nearly 100 disciples attacked with bloodshot eyes and even greater killing intent. As one shield layer after another shattered, Bai Xiaochun pushed the vortexes even harder, madly absorbing as much earth string energy as he could. Faster, he growled. Must go faster. Time passed, and soon the active paper talismans had been whittled down from 400 to 100. At that point, hissing sounds could be heard as the seventh vortex transformed into a full tide flow, and a seventh spiritual sea appeared in his Dantian region. Bai Xiaochun could clearly sense how much more powerful he was with that boundless seventh spiritual sea. At the same time, his eighth vortex began to spin even faster. It was at this point that Fang Lin trembled and finished his seventh tide flow. However, he was incapable of beginning an eighth and, in fact, anyone who could have examined him closely would have been able to tell that his seventh tide flow wasn't complete. Bai Xiaochun was essentially in control of half of the earth string energy in the world, and Fang Lin simply wasn't as well prepared as everyone else. Lower-level tide flows didn't require as much earth string energy, but in the seventh, it was quite the opposite, and Fang Lin simply couldn't compete with everyone else. He was totally spent. Bai Xiaochun, eyes raging with killing intent, he had no choice but to end his foundation establishment with a partially completed seventh spiritual sea. When the vortex above Fang Lin faded away, less of the earth string energy was being absorbed, and the overall tension in the fallen sword world eased up a bit. Not long after that, Song Ke and Nine Isles completed their seventh tide flows. Then, it was with great difficulty but no hesitation that they called upon the power of their secret magics to begin their eighth tide flows. Rumbling filled the entire world as unstable vortexes appeared above each of them. It seemed that for both of them, the eighth tide flow could fail at any moment. Apparently, the earth string energy in the world was barely enough to sustain two such vortexes. However, both of them struggled to hang on even longer. I can definitely reach 8 tide flows. Nine Isles howled. My goal isn't 8, it's 9. Song Q's eyes were completely bloodshot as he performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing his chest to wither up, and yet simultaneously unleashing a bizarre power that poured into the 8th tide flow vortex, resulting in it accelerating rapidly. The acceleration of Song Q's vortex seemed to exert incredible pressure onto Nine Isles' vortex. Nine Isles began to tremble as his vortex slowly withered. There's still hope. Nine Isles bit the tip of his tongue and then spit out a mouthful of blood, which transformed into a magical symbol that settled down onto him. As it did, the chain of magical symbols that surrounded him began to emit dazzling light, causing the whirlpool inside of him to speed up. Soon, he was catching up to Song Ke. However, it was at this point that Ghost Fong completed his 7th tide flow and began his 8th. Instantly, Nine Isles, who had already been teetering unstably, let loose a cry of despair. Moments later, Nine Isles' vortex shuddered, and then ground to a halt. No, Nine Isles howled, his eyes shining with madness. However, there was nothing he could do. His 8th tide flow was a failure. Now that both he and Fang Lin had ceased to absorb earth string energy, the pressure in the fallen sword world had eased significantly. With 2 less tide flow vortexes in the picture, Song Q's 8th tide flow stabilized even further. As for Ghost Fong, he also had a better chance than before, and was catching up relentlessly. Although he was also teetering on the verge of failure, he was still hanging on, and the question was how long he could continue to do so. Of course, Bai Xiaochun also benefited, and began to advance even more rapidly. It was a dazzling scene as 3 people proceeded through their 8th tide flow, Bai Xiaochun, Song Ke, and Ghost Fong. 2 people had failed so far, Fang Lin and Nine Isles. As for Shangguan Tianyu, Beihan Lai, Zhao Ru and Xu Zhaoshan, they were in the second wave. Because so much earth string energy had been absorbed by the disciples in the first wave, their speed was significantly slower. All of them had just begun their 4th tide flows. Hu Yunfei and some of the other miscellaneous chosen were in the 3rd wave, and had just begun their 2nd tide flows. As far as Hu Yunfei was concerned, considering his latent talent and expectations, even reaching 1 tide flow in Earthstring Foundation establishment was a significant accomplishment. By this point, the rest of the disciples had no hope whatsoever of finishing their Earthstring capture crystals, and therefore, no chance to even achieve a single tide flow. In their despair, such disciples' killing intent soared, and their eyes came focus on the 3 vortexes up above that represented the disciples in their 8th tide flows. Ghost Fong just started his 8th tide flow, and isn't completely stabilized. He has a lot of earth string energy, but not as much as Song Ke and Bai Xiaochun. Song Ke is super famous, and has a shocking murderous aura. Plus, it's never a good idea to provoke people from the bloodstream sect. Furthermore, he probably doesn't have as much earth string energy as Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun is already being besieged by quite a few people. We should take advantage of the moment to kill him. If he dies, his earth string energy will disperse back into the world. After analyzing the situation, most of the disciples chose to target Bai Xiaochun. In that same moment, Fang Lin finalized his foundation establishment and solidified his spiritual seas. Rumbling sounds echoed out as he flew up into the air, emanating the crushing pressure of foundation establishment. His hair whipped about as a mighty wind swirled around him. At the same time, the image of the heaven-earth furnace cauldron appeared behind him. Clearly, he was far superior to any chi condensation cultivator. He was the first person to reach foundation establishment, and was now the most powerful person in the fallen sword world. Since I got 7 tide flows, the rest of you better not even dream of finishing your 8th. Eyes flickering with killing intent, he looked around at Song Ke, Ghost Fang, and Bai Xiaochun. Then, he shot toward Bai Xiaochun like a bolt of lightning. I'll kill you first, and absorb your earth string energy. Maybe I can still reach 8 tide flows after all. When using tide flow power to reach earth string foundation establishment, it was possible for someone to interrupt any of their first 8 tide flows and prematurely reach foundation establishment. Furthermore, because the Tao foundation wasn't complete in such a situation, it was possible to continue after the interruption, as long as too much time didn't go by. However, because of the huge amount of earth string energy required, it was usually too difficult to do such a thing. In contrast, once a 9th tide flow began, one had to choose to either complete it or die trying. Almost in the same moment that Fang Lin headed toward Bai Xiaochun, rumbling sounds could be heard as 9 aisles rose up into the air like a bedeviled god. His hair whipped about him as the magical symbols which were wrapped around him loosened, creating a band of magical symbols 30 meters wide. They were black, and pulsed with the power of the exterminating obliteration technique, causing a will of extermination to fill the entire area. From the energy radiating off of him, he seemed even more powerful than Fang Lin. Since Fang Lin is taking out Bai Xiaochun, I'm going to kill Ghost Fang. Ghost Fang, if it weren't for the delay caused by your interference, I wouldn't have been the 4th in line to begin foundation establishment. Because I started so late, I wasn't able to complete my 8th tide flow. But I still have a chance if I kill you and absorb your earth string energy. 9 aisles threw his head back and roared, radiating hatred. He hated Bai Xiaochun, but he hated Ghost Fang even more. In the end, he attributed his failure to the sudden rise of Ghost Fang. Of course, he hated Song Ke just as much, and planned to get revenge on him as well. However, his plan was to first take out Ghost Fang. Radiating the might of foundation establishment, he blurred into motion as he shot through the air toward Ghost Fang. With an inward sigh of relief, Song Ke focused fully on his 8th vortex. 9 aisles and Fang Lin don't qualify to tangle with me. Only Bai Xiaochun and Ghost Fang do. However, if they get interrupted, that will be my greatest chance to succeed. There was nothing left of the lake above Bai Xiaochun, there was only a huge crater, at the bottom of which was the immortals' cave he had created. There, glittering shields were being constantly bombarded by disciples from the 3 sects. At the moment, there were only 100 shield layers left, which was when Fang Lin appeared like a bolt of lightning. He was a blur of motion that sped toward the shields and then waved his hand, causing the heaven-earth furnace cauldron to rapidly grow larger and then smash downward. "Break!" he shouted in a deafening roar that caused the other disciples to back up in astonishment. Many of them even coughed up mouthfuls of blood due to Fang Lin's foundation establishment might. The stunning power of the heaven-earth furnace cauldron was such that all 100 shields shattered from a single blow. Bai Xiaochun. Fang Lin's eyes flickered with killing intent as he prepared to enter the immortal's cave. However, it was at that moment that Bai Xiaochun looked up, his eyes completely bloodshot. "Fang Lin," he growled, and then his final 600 paper talismans all ignited. Popping sounds filled the air as 600 shields appeared to block Fang Lin's path. "Damn it, I can't believe he still has paper talismans left." Fang Lin frowned. He had just stepped into foundation establishment, and had not yet fully acclimated, and was thus unable to unleash the full potential of his battle prowess. The other disciples from the 3 sects all stared with wide eyes at what they were seeing. Gasps could be heard as they were shaken by the incredible display of wealth put on by Bai Xiaochun. They all knew how expensive paper talismans were, and a quick calculation revealed that he had just used over 1,000 of them. Instantly, exclamations of shock could be heard. How many paper talismans does he actually have? Damn it, most people use spell formations or magical techniques to defend themselves during Foundation establishment. I can't believe he's relying entirely on paper talismans. Even if he has more of them, it won't do him any good. He might as well forget about succeeding with his 8th tide flow. Fang Lin's eyes flickered as he let loose another attack. The booming sounds caused Bai Xiaochun to grow even more nervous, but at the same time, furious. Without Fang Lin, the situation wouldn't have been so nerve-wracking. But considering the power of Foundation establishment was now in the mix, Bai Xiaochun knew that his defenses couldn't hold out for very long. He just entered Foundation establishment and probably isn't completely used to it yet. I still have a chance. Gritting his teeth, he ignored the booming sounds and focused fully on rotating the whirlpool inside of him. As it spun faster and faster, the shields were broken away layer by layer. Fang Lin and the other disciples continued to unleash attacks, and time ticked away. Soon, half of the shields were gone, and yet Fang Lin was starting to get very nervous. Not good. It was at that very moment that Bai Xiaochun's 8th vortex suddenly stopped moving. His 8th tide flow was a success. An 8th spiritual sea appeared within him, just above the 7th. At the same time, it seemed like a 9th vortex was about to appear up above in the sky. My 9th tide flow will be my undying live forever technique. Bai Xiaochun's expression was one of madness as he put everything on the line. As he called upon the undying live forever technique, silver light spread out, within which faint traces of gold were already visible. As he did, a 9th vortex appeared overhead. His eyes were clamped shut, as though he didn't even have the power to open them. He almost seemed like he was on the verge of exploding. As for everyone else in the fallen sword world, it didn't matter what they were doing, their hearts trembled, and their jaws dropped. A 9th tide flow. I can't believe that 9 tide flows have appeared. The last time this happened was 800 years ago. Heavens. Outside Bai Xiaochun's immortals cave, Fang Lin's eyes went wide, and he shivered. He couldn't even complete 7 tide flows, and yet here someone was working on their 9th. In the middle of unleashing an attack on Ghost Fang's location, Nine Isles trembled and turned to look in Bai Xiaochun's direction. Panting, he said, the Spirit Stream Sect has started a 9th tide flow. We can't let that 9th tide flow succeed. Abandoning his enmity with Ghost Fang, he began to speed toward Bai Xiaochun. At the same time, Song Ke was panting, his eyes gleaming with the desire to do battle. Because Bai Xiaochun had begun his 9th tide flow, Song Ke's 8th tide flow now seemed to be on the verge of falling apart. Expression one of utter determination, he performed a double-handed incantation gesture and then slapped his hands down onto the ground, causing a boom to echo out. Moments later, cracking sounds could be heard from 9 locations within the fallen sword world, as earth string energy was apparently forcibly extracted using some special technique. Moments later, Song Ke's 8th tide flow stabilized. Ghost Fang observed silently as 9 Isles sped off into the distance. His expression was one of disappointment. He didn't want to admit it, but he could sense that his 8th tide flow was rapidly destabilizing. Because of the appearance of a 9th tide flow, it would soon shatter. Shangguan Tianyu was in the middle of his 5th tide flow, and as soon as he sensed that Bai Xiaochun had started a 9th tide flow, all of his confidence and pride was shattered. Never educated by his parents, and always pulling off freakish stunts. The shameless son of a bitch. I can't believe he got to 9 tide flows. What a massive joke. All of a sudden, Shangguan Tianyu let loose a stream of shrill laughter. Beihan Lai bitterly clenched his fists. Despite the endless frustrations caused by Bai Xiaochun, he had never given up hope that he could surpass him. As of this moment, he gritted his teeth, and felt more strongly than ever that he had to do just that. Everyone in the fallen sword world experienced a short moment of reflective silence. But then, the voices of Fang Lin and 9 Isles echoed out in all directions. Our 3 sects will never tolerate the appearance of 9 tide flows. You people know what we have to do. Kill Bai Xiaochun, stop the 9th tide flow, and return the earth string energy to the world around us. Profound Stream Sect, Blood Stream Sect, Pill Stream Sect. If we don't attack him together now, when will we? A moment later, Song Ke's voice rang out, grim and sinister. Kill Bai Xiaochun. The truth was that the 3 of them didn't even need to say anything. All of the non-Foundation establishment cultivators in the fallen sword abyss were terrified, and began to speed toward Bai Xiaochun, killing intent raging. Hu Yunfei had completed his third tide flow and was in the middle of his fourth. Suddenly, he smiled happily and said, Xiaochun, you defended me from the Luokan clan, and now, I'm going to defend you. His fourth tide flow began to fade as he chose to enter Foundation establishment at that very moment. He knew that Bai Xiaochun would be in a very weak state, and was about to be attacked by a whole horde of enemies. Therefore, he would defend Bai Xiaochun. Even as his tide flow ended, he cried out, Spirit Stream Sect disciples, it's me, Hu Yunfei. I just finished my own Foundation establishment, and I'm going to defend Bai Xiaochun. Who's with me? After a moment of silence, the voices of numerous Spirit Stream Sect disciples could be heard shouting in response. Sect Uncle Bai had our backs when we entered this place. I'm going to stand as his Dharma protector. Bai Xiaochun might be naughty and mischievous, but he's one of us. 9 tide flows. That's a sign that the Spirit Stream Sect is going to rise to prominence. You people want to kill Sect Uncle Bai? I don't think so. Virtually all of the Spirit Stream Sect disciples gritted their teeth and began to speed in Bai Xiaochun's direction. Ghost Fang couldn't hold on any longer. As his 8th tide flow faded away in failure, he thought for a moment, and then completely ignored Bai Xiaochun in favor of going to interfere with Songke. Apparently, he viewed Bai Xiaochun's success or failure as having nothing to do with himself. Beihan Lai let out a powerful roar. Suppressing the rage he felt toward Bai Xiaochun, he ended his 5th tide flow and chose to enter Foundation establishment immediately. Then, he stepped out to act as Dharma protector for Bai Xiaochun. This isn't for you, Bai Xiaochun, it's for the Spirit Stream Sect. There were a few other Spirit Stream Sect disciples who similarly gritted their teeth and then ended their tide flows to join their fellows. Soon, in the entire Spirit Stream Sect, the only person other than Bai Xiaochun who was still continuing with a tide flow was Shangguan Tianyu. Eyes bloodshot, he was completely ignoring everything else other than his own wavering 5th tide flow. Fierce fighting instantly broke out as the disciples charged in the direction of Bai Xiaochun. Soon, the area outside of Bai Xiaochun's Immortals Cave was the scene of a bitter battle as only a few dozen Spirit Stream sects stood against a crowd of over 100. Time passed, and the fighting only grew more intense. Under the combined attacks of Fang Lin and 9 Isles, Hu Yunfei was already seriously injured, as was Beihan Lai. The Spirit Stream Sect disciples were shoved back over and over again, and Bai Xiaochun's shields continued to be whittled away. Bai Xiaochun could sense what was happening outside, and he was left trembling. He wanted to end the tide flow, but quickly realized that he had no control over it. It was impossible to end it himself, and in fact, he wasn't even capable of opening his eyes. After all, the 9th tide flow represented the peak of Earthstring Foundation establishment. Unless the process were somehow interfered with, there were only 3 ways it could be ended. One was to succeed, which would naturally end the tide flow. The second way it might end was if the fallen sword world ran out of Earthstring energy, causing the tide flow to fade away. The final method was if the person undergoing their 9th tide flow was killed. Although his eyes were closed, they were completely bloodshot. He could sense that his fellow disciples were fighting for him, and he could tell that they were bleeding and injured, maybe even dying. His mind felt like it was being torn apart. He wanted to open his eyes to end the tide flow. But he couldn't. This 9th tide flow either needs to fail, or hurry up and finish. Arg, trembling physically, he let out a protracted inner howl. To everyone else, this was a rare occasion to see the peak of Earthstring Foundation establishment, something that, in the past several thousand years, had only occurred once, 800 years ago with Master Limitless of the Bloodstream Sect. However, to Bai Xiaochun, it was more than that. It was also a chance to make incredible progress with his Undying Live Forever technique. It was an opportunity to advance from Undying Silver Skin to Undying Gold Skin. With the life-saving magical item given to him by Li Qinghao, his entire body was covered by a layer of blackness, and yet not even that could prevent a faint gold light from glittering around him. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun had successfully cultivated the full first level of the Undying Codex. He had successfully broken through the first shackle of mortality, something no one else had been able to accomplish for countless years. Of course, a few people had accomplished that task in the past. After all, the point of the first volume of the Undying Codex was to break through that first shackle. But Bai Xiaochun was the first person to ever make additional progress even after breaking through the shackle. Generally speaking, there wasn't much in between the different layers that were the 5 shackles of mortality. They were like circles with a fixed size and shape. However, with Bai Xiaochun, that fixed circle appeared to be expanding rapidly. It was completely and utterly shocking. Rumbling sounds filled his body as the golden color of his skin grew more and more intense. The undying live forever technique was in full operation, and because he had broken through the first shackle, the 9th vortex up above began to spin even more quickly, causing his 9th tide flow to absorb earth string energy at a shocking rate. It was a harmonious cycle. The more earth string energy that came to form his 9th spiritual sea, the more golden light shone from his undying skin. That in turn caused the 9th tide flow to speed up even more. It was a seemingly unending cycle that only continued to accelerate as the moments passed. At the same time, Song Ke was calling upon everything he had at his disposal, including secret magics of the bloodstream sect and the energy nodes he had connected to earlier, to also absorb earth string energy at a shocking rate. For most people, the time it took to complete a tide flow was set, but Bai Xiaochun and Song Ke were completely breaking that trend. Both of them were sucking in as much earth string energy as other people might take a month to absorb. As for Song Ke, massive rumbling sounds filled the area surrounding him as Ghost Fong did everything he could to interfere. And yet, Song Ke still managed to succeed with his 8th tide flow. As the power of the 8th tide flow surged through him, Song Ke's eyes shone with madness and excitement. 9th tide flow, he howled. Outside, Ghost Fang's face flickered as he saw a 9th vortex spring into being in the sky above. According to an old saying, there can never be 2 suns in the sky at the same time. However, as of this moment, the 2 vortexes which could be seen in the fallen sword world were both that of the 9th tide flow, and everyone who could see them was shocked to the core. Even Shangguan Tianyu felt completely shaken. As for the disciples who were still trying to hang on to their own tide flows, their faces went ashen with despair. They could only watch helplessly as their tide flows faded away into nothing. There was simply no way to compete with the 2 king-like disciples who were in the middle of their 9th tide flows. No one could absorb any earth string energy with those vortexes in existence. I refuse to accept this, Shangguan Tianyu said through gritted teeth. However, his 5th tide flow was halted, and he had no other choice but to enter Foundation establishment. Killing intent surging in his eyes, he exploded into motion, not in Bai Xiaochun's direction, but to join Ghost Fong in resisting Song Ke. Inwardly, he howled, Bai Xiaochun, I hope you die, and I hope you do too, Song Ke. Zhao Ru also had no choice but to give up in the middle of her 5th tide flow, and it was the same with Xu Zhaoshan. As for everyone else, they were in their 2nd or 3rd tide flows. As of this moment, the only people still in the middle of reaching Earthstring Foundation establishment in the fallen sword world were Bai Xiaochun and Song Ke. The other disciples who had been interrupted wrathfully chose to either attack Bai Xiaochun or Song Ke. Considering that Bai Xiaochun had been the biggest hindrance to everyone, it was no surprise that most people chose to attack him. As such, the disciples who were defending Bai Xiaochun were already in imminent danger. Just as Zhao Ru was about to go attack Bai Xiaochun, she noticed that, somehow, the poison puppet she had created to defend herself, Gongsun Wan'er, was nowhere to be found. There wasn't a single trace left behind to indicate where she might have gone. Zhao Ru's heart trembled, but there was no time to ponder the matter carefully. Without any further hesitation, she shot toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were closed, but they were more bloodshot than ever. Must go faster, he murmured. Anxiety filled him. He didn't have any desire for the fellow disciples outside his immortals cave to die trying to defend him. It was at this moment that the entire immortals cave suddenly trembled violently as the final paper talisman shields outside were destroyed. Bai Xiaochun had used so many paper talismans that his defenses far exceeded those of the spell formations used by the other chosen. But now, they had been completely destroyed. As soon as that happened, the disciples of the other 3 sects unleashed all of their divine abilities in Bai Xiaochun's direction. Thankfully, Fang Lin and 9 Isles were being held off by Hu Yunfei, Beihan Lai, and 2 other Spirit Stream sect disciples who had reached Earthstring Foundation establishment, making it temporarily impossible for them to join in. Therefore, most of the people attacking Bai Xiaochun were Qi condensation disciples. Numerous cultivators unleashed magical techniques, all of which were blocked by Bai Xiaochun's divine crane shield. In the qi condensation stage, neither Hu Yunfei nor Beihan Lai had been on the same level as Fang Lin and Nine Isles. Now that they were in Foundation establishment, it was no different. Despite having the advantage of numbers, they were still in extreme danger, and were being injured repeatedly. Blood sprayed out of Hu Yunfei's mouth, and yet he continued to block the way, seemingly maddened. Beihan Lai hesitated for a moment. He was soaked with blood and covered with wounds, and as such, began to back up. He had come to help Bai Xiaochun, but wouldn't give his life for him. Seeing that the Immortals' cave was on the verge of being destroyed, he decided that now was the time to retreat. Fang Lin didn't chase him. Instead, he shot toward Bai Xiaochun, joining the qi condensation disciples to try and destroy the divine crane shield. "Are you looking to die?" Nine Isles barked, eyes flickering with killing intent. Considering he had just stepped into Foundation establishment, he didn't dare to unleash too much of his cultivation base, for fear that his Dao foundation was not stable. However, Hu Yunfei didn't seem to care at all about his Dao foundation, and was fighting like a madman, making it very difficult to keep him under control. Roaring in fury, Nine Isles launched an attack with the power of obliteration, which instantly slammed into Hu Yunfei, who didn't even have a chance to dodge. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he was sent tumbling backward, bones snapping left and right inside of him. After he landed hard on the ground, he struggled to rise to his feet but couldn't. All he could do was lay there helplessly as over 100 cultivators unleashed countless attacks onto Bai Xiaochun. "Xiaochun," he murmured, "this is my fault for being so useless." The other Spirit Stream Sect disciples were all seriously injured. Thankfully, the disciples from the other three sects were focused on killing Bai Xiaochun, and weren't trying to kill them. Of course, each and every enemy disciple wanted to be the one to land the killing blow. After all, whoever was closest to Bai Xiaochun when he died would benefit the most from the resulting blast of earth string energy that would spread out. By now, none of the Spirit Stream Sect disciples had any energy left to fight, and could only bitterly watch Bai Xiaochun being bombarded. Massive booms echoed out constantly. Fang Lin and Nine Isles were already top chosen, and were now 7 Tide Flow's Earthstring Foundation establishment cultivators. Under their leadership, the bombardment of all the qi condensation disciples caused cracks to spread out all over Bai Xiaochun's divine crane shield. "Time to die, Bai Xiaochun. Return your Earthstring energy to the world around you," Fang Lin said. "Maybe I can't continue with my tide flow, but at least some of my fellow Pillstream Sect disciples will reach Earthstring Foundation establishment. Bai Xiaochun, there's no way we'll let you succeed." As the crowd roared, the divine crane shield finally exploded. The magical item which Bai Xiaochun's elder brother sect leader had given him shattered. As it did, the soul of the divine crane flew out and settled down around Bai Xiaochun, providing one last measure of defense. However, it only took moments for it to begin to fade away. In that instant, the entire group of disciples from the other 3 sects stormed in. It was also at that point that the final wave of disciples who had reached Foundation establishment joined the crowd. The most powerful among them had reached 5 tide flows, and the weakest, 1. However, they were still Earthstring Foundation establishment cultivators, and their attacks caused the divine crane to let out a piercing cry as it disappeared. Zhao Ru from the Pillstream Sect attacked with particular viciousness, and as soon as the crane vanished, she reached out to touch Bai Xiaochun's forehead. "It doesn't matter that you're an 8 Tide Flows Foundation establishment expert, you won't be able to escape death this time. All Spirit Stream Sect disciples must die." Zhao Ru's beauty was twisted by venomous rage as her finger made contact with Bai Xiaochun's forehead. Just as she was expecting his head to explode, a powerful force slammed back into her, shoving her backward several meters. At the same time, the attacks from the other disciples also rebounded. Booms rang out, but a black glow emanated from Bai Xiaochun, defending against everything. "Damn it, he still has more defenses. This Bai Xiaochun has profound defensive preparations. He must have known that reaching 9 tide flows would provoke widespread rage. That was why he prepared so well ahead of time. It doesn't matter how many defensive layers he has. However much earth string energy he's absorbed, that's how much he's going to spit back out." The glow of magical techniques rose high into the air as 7 or 8 Foundation establishment cultivators and more than 100 qi condensation disciples unleashed attacks. The life-saving magical item from Li Qinghao began to distort, and after a few moments, a popping sound could be heard as it reverted into a bracelet, which was now covered with cracks. If it weren't for the fact that the new Foundation establishment cultivators didn't dare to fully call upon all their power, it would have already been destroyed. When the black glow vanished, Bai Xiaochun was revealed, shining with boundless golden light. Die, Zhao Ru said excitedly. She once again reached out with her index finger, and yet, before she could get close, Bai Xiaochun's eyes snapped open. They looked like the eyes of a wild beast, filled with boundless madness and infinitely burning rage. The entire world seemed to suddenly freeze in place. When Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes, he saw Nine Isles' vicious expression, Fang Lin's cruel smile, and other Foundation establishment cultivators, including Zhao Ru, whose beautiful face was twisted with venomous rage as she reached out toward his forehead. Everything around him was moving incredibly slowly, as if time had suddenly been locked in place. He could sense that his ninth tide flow had ended, and that a ninth spiritual sea existed in his Dantian region. He now had a total of 9 spiritual seas, each one larger and more magnificent than the one beneath it. Boundless spiritual power surged inside of him, pouring through his body. As his spiritual seas grew more and more stable, his Dao foundation was formed. He also realized something that none of the other disciples would be aware of. The peak of Earthstring Foundation establishment, 9 tide flows, didn't require a long period of stabilization like the other levels did. It stabilized almost instantly, filling him with a sensation of unprecedented power. He had never experienced this level of spiritual power, this much vital energy. He could clearly sense the terrifying life force that radiated out from him, as well as the signs that his longevity was increasing. In addition to all that, his undying skin had already broken through to the next level. Instead of undying silver skin, he now had undying gold skin. He had advanced by leaps and bounds, had become more powerful in all aspects. He had reached a new level of life that was completely different from before. As of this moment, he was no longer a part of the mortal world, but was a true cultivator who had shed his mortality. However, the price he had to pay was immense, and he was well aware of that. He understood that only the fit survived, and he understood the law of the jungle. He knew that on the path to living forever, it didn't matter if he hated fighting and killing. The path was narrow and cramped, and although he was willing to walk it along with others, there were many who didn't share such sentiments. He knew now more than ever that sometimes, even if he didn't feel like killing someone, that person might want to kill him. In that case, he could either close his eyes and die, or unleash his rage and fight. He saw the shattered battleground that was the area outside his immortals' cave. He saw the injured spirit stream sect disciples, and he saw the bloodied and unconscious Hu Yunfei. He was so moved that tears welled up in his eyes. These were his own fellow disciples, like his family. Each and every spirit stream sect disciple was a person he would never be able to forget. He saw some of the spirit stream sect disciples who were now nothing more than corpses, and it filled his heart with pain. Their end came much like Zhou Yudao's, and that idea filled Bai Xiaochun with so much rage that his eyes turned red. How his fury burned. He was furious that he had been besieged, and furious that Spirit Stream sect disciples had died defending him. He was furious that, despite not having provoked any of these other sects, they had come to take his life. I practice cultivation because I want to live forever. I don't like fighting and killing. But, I can if I have to. To Bai Xiaochun, the world had turned as crimson as blood. Everything had slowed down to the point where it wasn't moving. My fellow Spirit Stream sect disciples died protecting me. So now, I'll make sure the survivors reach Foundation establishment. Each and every Spirit Stream sect disciple here is going to get to Earthstring Foundation establishment. Rage burning in his heart, he spoke the words like an oath, and then, everything seemed to return to normal. Zhao Ru looked just as ferocious as she had moments ago. As her index finger closed in on his forehead, it suddenly lurched to a stop. At some unknown point, Bai Xiaochun had raised his own right hand, and before Zhao Ru even realized what had happened, he clamped his hand down onto her wrist. No, she screamed. She was about to attempt to sever her own arm to get away, but Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered with killing intent, and he squeezed his hand down. A popping sound could be heard, along with a bitter scream as Zhao Ru's entire arm exploded. At the same time, Bai Xiaochun rose to his feet and took a step forward, slamming bodily into her. Her chest caved in and blood sprayed out of her mouth, along with a choked shriek. Even as she attempted to turn and flee, her entire body exploded. At the same time, her Dao foundation was destroyed. She had just stepped into Foundation establishment, and the earth string energy inside of her hadn't completely solidified. As she died, massive quantities of earth string energy erupted out in all directions. Bai Xiaochun quickly waved his sleeve, sending it in the direction of the spirit stream sect disciples. Everything happened in the briefest of moments. Bai Xiaochun's hair flew around him as he took another step forward, appearing in front of a disciple from the profound stream sect who had experienced 2 tide flows. Before the disciple even realized what was happening, Bai Xiaochun grabbed his neck and squeezed his hand down. Crack! Bai Xiaochun threw the body toward the spirit stream sect disciples, and as it exploded, large quantities of earth string energy surged out. He took another step forward, ending up in front of a disciple from the bloodstream sect who had experienced 3 tide flows. A single fist strike, and the disciple exploded. One more step put him in front of a disciple from the Pillstream sect with a single tide flow cultivation base. Bai Xiaochun waved his hand, and the aura of the Water Swamp Kingdom appeared. It was merely the aura, nothing more, and yet the Pillstream sect disciples' eyes went bloodshot and exploded into bits. Just like before, earth string energy flowed out toward the spirit stream sect disciples. At that point, Bai Xiaochun stopped in place. Only a brief moment had elapsed since he had stepped forward to kill Zhao Ru. As he stood there, surrounded by rumbling sounds, the crowds of attacking disciples from the other sects were shocked to find that the person who had been sitting cross-legged in meditation had vanished, and now stood right in front of them. Zhao Ru had been killed, and Foundation establishment cultivators from the Pillstream sect, Profound Stream sect, and Bloodstream sect had all been cut down. At the same time, a huge amount of earth string energy was swirling toward the Spirit Stream sect disciples, who were just as shocked as everyone else. Voice booming like thunder, Bai Xiaochun roared, "Friends from the Spirit Stream sect, the time has come to reach Earthstring Foundation establishment, and I will be your Dharma protector." Trembling, the Spirit Stream sect disciples quickly sat down cross-legged and began to absorb the earth string energy. Because this earth string energy came directly from slaughtered Foundation establishment cultivators, there was no need for an earth string capture crystal to be able to absorb it. Everything happened so quickly that the minds of the onlookers were left reeling, and their scalps went numb. Gasps could be heard as all of them were filled with intense sensations of deadly crisis. Nine Isles' eyes were wide with disbelief. Fang Lin was shaking visibly, and felt as if every drop of blood inside of him were screaming at him that Bai Xiaochun was more terrifying than he could possibly imagine. Impossible. Even as everyone reeled in shock, killing intent flickered in Bai Xiaochun's eyes, and he took another step forward, placing him in front of Nine Isles. A single punch caused blood to spray out of Nine Isles' mouth. Screaming, he called upon all of the power of the exterminating obliteration technique to defend himself. Then, face ashen, he fled without the slightest hesitation. Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered. He had sensed a strange power in Nine Isles just now, something that protected his life force. Even though it wasn't a full match for Bai Xiaochun, it was still powerful. Bai Xiaochun let Nine Isles flee, and flickered into motion, appearing in front of Fang Lin. Instantly, 2 fingers shot out toward Fang Lin's throat. It didn't matter how Fang Lin tried to defend himself. It didn't matter what magical techniques or magical items he called up. Everything was crushed by Bai Xiaochun's fingers. They destroyed everything like a hammer crushing an ice cube, speeding forward to latch onto Fang Lin's throat. Throat-crushing grasp. A cracking sound rang out, and Fang Lin's eyes went wide. Blood oozed out of his mouth as his 7-layered Dao foundation collapsed. He wasn't even able to scream. Bai Xiaochun tossed his body off to the side, releasing earth string energy 10 times stronger than anything before. The Spirit Stream sect disciples trembled as they madly absorbed it. "I never thought you'd be so much weaker than Nine Isles," Bai Xiaochun said, eyes flashing. It was at that very moment that a black soul fire flew out from Fang Lin's body, but before it could get very far, Bai Xiaochun took a step forward and grabbed it. A face was visible inside of the soul fire, but it wasn't Fang Lin's. It was a sinister face which was half covered by a black birthmark, making it almost look like a yin-yang symbol. It stared at Bai Xiaochun, and then began to chuckle. "I'm only a soul seed, but considering I found someone interesting like you among all these people makes dying worth it. I'm sure we'll meet again someday." With that, the soul fire faded away. Although no one else was able to observe what had happened, Bai Xiaochun could hear the voice clearly in his head. "Parlor tricks. Bai Xiaochun said, snorting coldly. It was only at around this time that the other disciples in the area began to react. Miserable screams rang out as the terrified disciples attempted to flee in all directions. As far as they were concerned, Bai Xiaochun had turned into a devil. Zhao Ru's dead, Fang Lin's dead, 9 Isles has fled. Heavens! Is this the peak of Earthstring Foundation establishment? 800 years ago, Master Limitless of the Bloodstream Sect reached the peak, and almost all of the disciples from the other 3 sects were wiped out. Screaming, the more than 100 disciples in the area began to flee as if they had gone mad. Their minds were trembling, and they were completely and utterly shaken by the terror that was Bai Xiaochun. At the same time, the Spirit Stream Sect disciples were shivering in excitement. Beihan Lai was panting as he looked at Bai Xiaochun, his feelings even more complicated than before. However, his determination to surpass him only continued to grow stronger. Bai Xiaochun didn't chase any of the fleeing disciples. He quickly went over to Hu Yunfei and placed his palm onto his chest. Earthstring energy poured into him, restoring his Tao foundation. A moment later, the signs of a tide flow once again appeared. Hu Yunfei slowly opened his eyes, and when he saw Bai Xiaochun, he smiled. Bai Xiaochun looked around at the other Spirit Stream Sect disciples as they reached Earthstring Foundation establishment. None of them would be able to achieve 3 tide flows, only 2 at the most. After all, even with Bai Xiaochun helping them, there still wasn't much Earthstring energy left to split between everyone. Despite that, everyone was profoundly shaken. Not enough Earthstring energy. Bai Xiaochun thought as he watched Hu Yunfei absorbing the energy. Then he looked up toward the lone remaining vortex up in the sky. It was none other than Song Ke, in the middle of his 9th tide flow. You sent people to kill me and stop my 9 tide flows. Well, Bai Xiaochun isn't the type of person who gets hit and doesn't hit back. If I stop your tide flow, Big Bro Hu will have more Earthstring energy for himself. His eyes flashed with cold light, but then he hesitated, as he remembered that there were many disciples here who needed someone to stand for them as Dharma protector. Beihan Lai took a deep breath as he sensed that his own fated tide flow was on the verge of resuming. Bai Xiaochun, you go. We might have a beef with each other, but I have no desire for a second Master Limitless to arise in the Bloodstream Sect. You go stop Song Ke. I'll defend everyone here. Bai Xiaochun gave him a deep look, his heart filled with regret. After clasping hands and bowing deeply, he transformed into a beam of light that shot up toward Song Ke. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.